probably the best goal ever in women's World Cup football. 35-meter free kick against Nigeria in golden goal. Welcome back, viewers and subscribers, to Wizards of Sports. I'm your host, Sports Greg, and to say another show was long overdue is an understatement, but bear with me. The hike in gas prices kind of got to me, That's 395 since the last video, and I'm just making it back to the studio, so bear with me, viewers and subscribers. Alright, so for this show, I'm doing in honor of Women's Month, which this year is March 1st to the 31st. And today's show, I'm going to talk about the evolution or the revolution of women's soccer or women's football, depending on which side of the globe you're on. Alright, so women's football kind of got started around about the same time as the men's game, or a little bit after the men's game, but much attention wasn't paid to it. As a matter of fact, it was frowned upon, laughed at, jokes made about it. It was a big political debate concerning women competing in certain sports, Anyways, in 1895, a British woman named Nettie Honeyball convinced about 30 or so other women to form a team, which was then called the British Ladies Football Club. Now, they had their first game, and this could be considered the first official women's football game on March 23rd, 1895, with the London South versus London North teams. I don't remember the outcome or the scoreline of that game, but that was what basically, you could say that was the first brick that was laid in terms of women's football and where it is today, women's soccer. Anyways, fast forward from that game or that day, there was a long time when the game was banned. Our clubs weren't allowed to host the game, and club grounds weren't allowed to host women's game in England. But fast forward to 1991, when FIFA hosted the first Women's World Cup. Actually, it wasn't even called the Women's World Cup back then. It was called the FIFA Women's World Championship, because FIFA didn't want to basically water down the title or the name given to the men's competition, so they call it the Women's World Championship. Now, USA won the first one, beating China. Actually, it was hosted in China. USA won that one. Now, then striker for the US team, Michelle Akers, scored 10 goals in that competition, which is still the highest number of goals in a single tournament for a female football player. So she had 10 goals in that tournament, that US team, which also boasted the future face of US soccer, at least for over a decade, in Mia Hamm. But back then, Michelle Akers was the one carrying the team, even though Mia Hamm was, back then she was like the Michael Jordan of female soccer, with her being wearing the brand Nike, which wasn't really synonymous with football back then. But yes, she was the face of Nike women's soccer back in the 90s. So, there has been 8 Women's World Cups since that one. USA with 4, Germany 2, Japan 1, and Norway 1. There have been some close calls for other teams. Brazil came close in 1999. Sweden has been close. China has been close. England team did pretty well the last World Cup. The Netherlands are looking really good as well. So it has come a long way, and more teams are stamping their class and making a name for themselves where women's soccer is concerned. But back to the World Cup format. When the first tournament was organized in 1991, the games were only 80 minutes because FIFA felt like women could not endure the full 90 like men do now. So it was 40-minute halves, 80-minute game, which over time changed. But in the first World Cup or first World Championship, it was only 40 minutes per half. Mia Hamm, like I stated before, she took over from Michelle Akers as the face of USA Soccer. She has two World Cup two World Cup medals, two Olympic gold medals, and she was the leading woman scorer until 2013 when I think Abby Wambach was the one that broke her record. But now she sits in third position behind only Abby Wambach and Christine Sinclair from Canada. So those are the top two, with Mia Hamm being in third place currently on the goal scoring list. But yes, if you were around in the 90s, that was the name, like I said before, that was synonymous with women's soccer. Like everywhere you went or every time you turned on the TV and there was any advert. As a matter of fact, she was even in, like she was getting the same commercial deals like, I said Jordan back then. Everything Nike, Gatorade, and so on. She was on it. So big ups to Mia Hamm and, helping to spread the women's game worldwide like she did back then. Moving on from the players that highlighted or pushed the USA or soccer in the USA, which it's a game that's always been played amongst women in the US, unlike countries like Brazil or England where at some point or another it was forbidden. The US, even if it's just for recreational purposes, women has always been allowed to play the game here. So, that was not a big issue here. It was just on the world stage for FIFA themselves to acknowledge it and make a competition of it. As a matter of fact, they had minor competitions in the 80s, but those weren't considered World Cups. But they were international competitions back in 84 and 88. 88 was actually the first one sanctioned by FIFA. I think that was held in China as well. Anyways, moving on to Brazil. Now, in 1941, Brazil had outlawed women playing soccer. And I quote, "Women were banned from practicing certain sports because they are incompatible with the conditions of their nature." Now, one of those sports was football. So even though a lot of Brazilian females were technically gifted, they were not as skillful as the men, but they played with a lot of flair as well. Whenever they did, it would basically mean they would have to hide and do so, or not do so at all, actually. Now, during the era of football prohibition in Brazil, in 1967, a young lady was born named Cece. That's actually her football nickname, like, with most Brazilian sports. Their legal name or their government name is about 5 names long, so I'm unable to call her full name at this time. But Cece was born in 1967. So she was born during the time of football prohibition. But she was the youngest of 10, most of whom were boys. And growing up, she braved the law and played football with her brothers and other young boys in the community. Sometimes earning the wrath of other parents because she was so good and she wasn't supposed to be playing, while other times causing fights to start over her because both sets of teams wanted her to be on their team. Anyways, in 1979, her dream was to be realized when the new Brazilian government lifted the ban on women playing sports in Brazil. Well, not sports, but football in Brazil. So, as a 14 years old, she left home to sign a contract. Well, not necessarily a professional contract, but she started playing for a club in her state in Brazil. As a 17-year-old in '84, she got called to the then Brazil national team, women's team, first team actually, but because it needed signature of both parents because she was underage, her mom had to forge her dad's signature because her dad was working away and it would take days for him to get back home. So she forced her mom to forge her dad's signature so she could get to play with the team. And she was a part of that first FIFA tournament in 1988 in China. Fast forward to 1999, which is when the world really got to know who Cisse was. And back then she was dubbed the Rivaldo of women's football in Brazil. As a matter of fact, she is the first woman to wear the number 10 for Brazil, the coveted number 10, worn by Pele, 3-time World Cup champion. She's the first woman to wear that number. So just to show you how important and how big of a player she was. She announced herself on the world stage in that tournament when in sudden death she scored probably the best goal ever in women's World Cup football. 35-meter free kick against Nigeria in golden goal, sending her team through to the next stage of the knockouts. They ended up finished third in that tournament, but that to me is their best showing ever in a World Cup. I mean, even the teams with the likes of Marta and Formiga, to me, haven't performed as well as that 99 team did. But so hats off to Cisse, who was back then considered the queen of Brazilian football. She paved the way. I mean, basically when that 99 team, they did not get paid. They were not sponsored. I mean, there's a lot of things that were going against that team. But they came out, they showed out, and, they announced themselves as one of the women's soccer nations to take note of. Moving on, like I said, Marta over the years have carried that torch for Brazil women. I'm not sure the amount of times, but she has won the Women's Ballon d'Or multiple times, probably as much as Messi for the men. And she was once considered the Ronaldinho of women's football. So Marta is another great name that has helped with the revolution or the evolution of women's football. Just a few other names that I would like to give some credit to before I move on. The likes of Abby Wambach, Heather O'Reilly, Julie Foudy, Kelly Simmet from England, Alex Scott from England. There's also Eni Aluko. She plays for Juventus now, but she was also in the NWSL in the US at one time. There's also names like Kim Little. Currently there's Vivian Miedema, a Dutch striker who basically plays anywhere in the front line. There is Khadija Bonisha from Jamaica, who announced herself in the 2019 edition of the Women's World Cup and now plies her trade for Manchester City in England. So lots of women football players continuing to make waves and open new doors for females in their country, back home, wherever it is that they're from. And Khadija Banisha is one such female that has opened more doors and continues to shine the light of and women's sport. Moving on, the 90s, the women's soccer in the 90s has also opened the door for a bunch of women's leagues. Some of them failed at the start. Some of them were postponed for years, like the leagues in the USA. There was the WPS, there was the WSA, which was the first league to play women soccer players as professionals. And that lasted from 2001 to 2003. Didn't last long. It was then taken over by the WPS, which was from 07 to 2012. And now the NWSL, which has been running since 2012 to currently, is the league that professional soccer players in the USA play. Well, there's not just from the USA, but from all over the world. But that's the league that's now played in the USA. And there are 12 teams in the league, and it's actually has gained a lot of popularity, a lot of sponsorship. As a matter of fact, USA Women's Soccer just won a lawsuit where the women's soccer players are supposed to be getting not necessarily equal pay, but there will be a substantial increase in their income. Also in England, there's the Women's Super League, which originally started in 1991. Was formed in 1991. It wasn't called the Women's Super League back then. I think it was called the Women's National League. But over the years, Arsenal have won 12 titles in that. And fast forward to today's day, the league has grown so much where all the major professional clubs in England has a women's team. And not only that, their games are no longer just played on the training grounds, but at times, especially if there's no home game on that weekend for the men's team, the women's team actually plays in their stadium. Which earlier in the season, Arsenal women played at the Emirates. Some of the women's team have their own grounds, but depending on the opposition and where the men's team is playing on that weekend, the women sometimes gets to play in the men's stadium. So kudos to the Women's Super League or the FA in England for improving the game in that sense. There's also the Women's UEFA Champions League, which started in 2001, and there have been some very, very good teams in that competition over the years. Teams like Lyon, Barcelona, PSG, Chelsea have done pretty good in it. So that's where the women's game is right now. Probably not where a lot of women advocates want it to be, but compared to where it was even the 90s, where it is right now, it is a major step. It has evolved a great deal. And for those continue to push it, I've heard a lot of people bash the league. I've had friends that tell me that they would prefer to watch ice dry. I'm telling you, you can watch a few women's game and you'll be surprised to see how technically gifted and how good some of these women's games are. Anyways, that's all I have time for today. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, stay safe, be blessed, peace.